Batra Daf Mem Dalet 12 or 13 lines down. Last thing we mentioned was the Beraita that mentions that if you sell something like property, you can't testify on it because of biasness, versus if you sell some movable object like a garment or an animal, you can testify. We're not worried about bias. We gave Rav Sheshat explanation. We didn't like it. Now we're going to do another one. I look at the Rabbi Shmuel, the Rabbi Shmuel. Person sells the field to his friend without a guarantee, which means I don't guarantee it. I'm not going to reimburse you if it gets taken away from my creditors. Anyway, he can't testify on the buyer's behalf because now the seller is making the field available to the creditor, and therefore he's biased. In other words, the bias says I don't pass a real estate. But regarding to a cow or a garment, bistama, where there was no mention of a lien on it, meaning he didn't say I didn't have a lien on it. So let me stop it later because people don't usually mortgage these type of things. My time, why don't we mortgage put liens on these type of items? They're movable objects. Movable objects don't become mortgage. There is no lien on it. If someone grabs it, I don't have to pay it back. Or rather, I don't guarantee loans on it. Even if I did write it on the document, that if I'm selling you this cow and you could collect, if someone takes it from me, you could collect even my shirt, for example. That only applies where it's still present in the possession. But if it's not present anymore, Yani is already sold by the guy, then he cannot collect it. And therefore, since there's no lien on these movable objects, then for sure the guy can testify it because there's no way that the creditor can take. All right. So in the case of real estate, because technically my creditor can take it, therefore I can't testify that I sold it to Reuven. So the case of a movable object, there is no lien on it. Therefore, the guy can never claim it back. And therefore, I can testify on movable objects. Now, I feel now, even if I made the item in apotiki we had a few times in Shas, is something called apo tehe kai. So they smush the words together to make apotiki. It means here it shall remain for you to collect, which means I am leaving this item as a guarantee for the sale. If I can pay back my loan, you'll collect from my cow. Now, Namilo, it's still not be considered mortgage. At my time, why that says if a guy made his slave the apotiki, which means if I don't pay my loan, you collect my slave. Then I sold the slave. The slave, the guy who money to can grab the slave. However, Sharov, Hamara, apotiki, an ox or a donkey, so that in Baal Chov you still can't collect it. So even if there is a lien, like an apotiki, you still can't collect it. My time, why? When you make a slave of real estate, because a lot of times we consider slaves like real estate, those things have public knowledge of becoming an apotiki, becoming a lien. But a designation of an animal or a garment, for example, there's no knowledge, and therefore, if it's sold, you still can't collect. In other words, okay, you tell me that I can't make a garment or a cow as a lien on the property, but what if, a lien on the loan? What if it's possible to make maybe the item, the movable object, is liened through real estate, which means I put a lien on. I borrowed him $10 million. I borrowed. I said this $9 million property and $1 million of movable objects shall become the loan and the guarantee for the loan. So that works. If I make the lien on movable objects with real estate, it can become a good lien. If someone does that, he makes a lien on movable objects with real estate. You acquire the real property. And he acquires the lien on the movable. So how come over here we don't say that? That only works, by the way, when it's not like a conditional commitment, like we said earlier, nasmachta is where you guarantee things more than proportion. That's an exaggeration and won't count. But look, also that's not like a document that's like a form of a document where it looks like a draft, and therefore it's not meant to be taken literally. This only works if it looks completely legit. So how come over there you can collect? Maybe it's considered, and you testify. Maybe it's considered. Maybe it's part of this real estate deal, and therefore you shouldn't be able to. The guy bought this cow an item or the garment, and he sold it right away, and therefore there's no chance for it to become part of a real estate deal. And that's why we're not afraid. The Gemara says, maybe you should be worried. The Akmili, maybe the guy took out the loan before he bought it. And then, therefore, he put it on afterward. The Gemara says, Shema, we see from here, the Aknik Kana Umachar, that if a guy attaches a lien on an object that he'll buy afterward, Kana Vehorish, or he bought it, then he gave it as inheritance, Lo Mishtabit, since it wasn't there at the time of the loan, it happened afterward, it does not become lien. Gemara says lo tzricha. So Gemara says, is that true? I apologize. It's not for sure. Gemara says, is that true that it won't become lead afterward, after the fact? Gemara says lo tzricha. No, that only applies the ka'amre edim, where we have witnesses testifying. We know over here that the reason why this guy does not have these movable objects leaned is not because we necessarily see that he didn't do it, but rather we know he doesn't own real estate to tie it to the loan, and that's why over here we're not worried. Okay. Says, even though Chamim say the person sells the field without a guarantee on it, and the creditor grabs it, the buyer can't go back to the seller to get his money back. Because we see, why can he get his money back? Because I warned you. I said I'm not guaranteeing it. Someone grabs it, he grabs it. However, let's say I sold the property and we find out that it would never belong to me in the first place. That property, that money goes back to the buyer because that was a misleading sale. So the Gemara says, so the Gemara's question was that since we see that if something does not belong to you, then you'd have to return it. So maybe over here regarding the garment and the cloak and the cow, for example, if he testifies that it used to belong to him, he is biased because if he does not prove that it belonged to him, he'd have to refund him, like we see in that case. Gemara says, no, we had this case talking about Makir should be back. We already know that it belongs to him because we recognize that it belongs to, it's the child of one of his animals, and therefore we know it's for sure his, and therefore there is no biasness. As it says, I feel even if you find, according to him, that even if that's how you sell the field and it doesn't belong to you, in the buyer does not get his money. He's like, that's the reason why I sold it to you without a guarantee, because I was tricking you. Very, very big chidush. I could sell the Manhattan Bridge and then not refund the guy. We said earlier that if you sell a field to your friend without a guarantee, the guy can't testify because of the creditor. That's the case. If the guy owns other properties when he wants to testify, then you have to return it to him. Meaning, if I'm selling it to him, I sold him field A. The guy's coming over to me to grab field A back from my buyer for the debt. But if I have other fields, then I have to give him field B and C in my possession. He can't grab that one. I know the land. What's the difference if the guy collects it? He has nothing else for him to take. The Gemara says really is no other land, and still he wants to grab property. The seller could tell him, the reason why I don't want you to grab field A from this guy, even though I have no other fields, is because I don't want to be a guy who borrows and doesn't pay. It's pasuk that curses someone like that. The Gemara says, what do you mean? If this guy, you owe this guy money also, right? So you're afraid that if he grabs the field from your buyer, you're going to be cursed because you messed over the buyer. But over here as well, if you don't pay back this guy, then you're also a guy who doesn't pay back loans and cursed. The Gemara says, no. He can say that's not my problem because that's why I sold to that guarantee, and therefore I'm not concerned. Machriz Rav is an announcement. Whoever goes up to Eretz Yisrael or down to Babel, Hi Bar Yisrael, any Jew. Whoever sells a donkey to another Jew, and a goy comes and grabs it, saying that it belongs to him. The halacha is that you have to the seller has to try to get back the donkey from the goy. Yani, you have to basically prove that it actually belonged to you. The buyer should not have to deal with this. That only applies to that only applies if we don't know for sure that it used to belong to him. But if, let's say, we know that it belonged to the seller initially and the goy is grabbing it for no reason, then it's the buyer's problem. I already sold to you, it's not my problem. That only applies where the goy did not take the donkey and the saddle, because that shows that he's taking his donkey. If it's showing that he's taking his donkey, then we tell the seller, listen, he didn't take the saddle, showing that he's trying to claim was his. Go prove that it used to belong to you, or go bring the donkey back. But if he took the donkey and the saddle, no, you don't have, the seller doesn't have to retrieve it because obviously the goy is trying to steal it. Amir says, even if none of these things happen, the seller never has to get it back. My time, why? So we have no reason to believe the goy because a stam, an average goy, is a robber. Pasuk says, their right hand is lying, and therefore we should believe the seller when he says it's his, and therefore we never believe the goy, and therefore the buyer, we wish luck to the buyer, and the seller has no reason to get involved.